Hello and welcome to ELT Under the Covers Crumbs on the Sheets, where we take a broader look at the education, learning and teaching industry community, and we go a little bit more in depth into topics that are on our minds and have been suggested by you, our viewers. But first, introductions. I'm Neil of NeilTEAcher.
Hello everybody, it's ProfesorRich.
What are the crumbs on the sheets?
The crumbs on the sheets. There's always.
What have we been eating?
There's always loads of crumbs on the sheets, isn't there? There's loads of crumbs on the sheets. Lots of things to be talking about. That I've been really experimenting quite a lot with Dogme/Dialogic Storytelling Classes recently, and I've really been getting into it a lot more. Really trying to just see what I can do with dialogic storytelling, and I think the classes have been relatively successful, although perhaps sometimes lacking a little bit of direction. But there was one that in particular that went very, very well recently, which was based on something that really happened to me. One of the things I've found kind of experimenting with dialogic storytelling is that you don't necessarily need a very interesting story to make it interesting. It can still be interesting even if it's a relatively boring story. So I can give you an example of this one that went quite well. And this really was, it was a class that literally, the inspiration came to me like 5 minutes before the class started, and I just punched a few things into a Word document, so I had a bit of a scaffold, a bit of structure for me to fall back on, and then I kind of went with it. And I did use it with a relatively high level class. We're talking upper intermediate, so everybody knows upper intermediate, you can kind of fly by the seat of your pants a bit more than elementary or pre-intermediate. However, since then I've used an adapted version with elementary, and it works fine. It just needed a lot of the language needed to be changed. I needed to think about it a bit more.
Rate it a little bit more and stuff.
Yeah, just be a little bit more prepared, because you can't quite get away with as much spontaneity. So, start of the class, I began with a hook that I know Mr. Keddy uses something similar, and the hook was, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's about something that's happened to me 3 times in the last 2 years. And it's not good. So something that's happened to me 3 times in the last 2 years is not good. And then I wrote on the board, an unanticipated, and then blank. Right? Oh. And then we talked about what unanticipated is. Is it surprise? Okay, unexpected. But how do we use it? Is it negative, positive, neutral? Well, unanticipated, it's kind of negative, isn't it? It sounds a bit negative. It's not like a surprise. A surprise can be a nice surprise, but you don't exactly have a nice unanticipated present. It's like unanticipated normally indicates some sort of a problem. So then I asked them all to brainstorm the word that could go in there. What is this unanticipated thing? So they all chatted together about that, and we get you get loads of ideas. You get loads of runtime with stuff like this, especially if the students are kind of creative. They'll come up with all kinds of stuff. An unanticipated phone call, unanticipated accident, unanticipated illness. Unanticipated
accidents.
Yeah, well, I guess they normally are unanticipated. Unanticipated issue and problem came up quite a lot. Unanticipated issue, unanticipated problem. We talked about all these kind of things, and I had quite a bit of mileage with that. That the first time I did this class, and that was the one when it went really well, which was the one that was sort of last minute in a way. That stage of the class went on for about 15 minutes, people talking about all these different unanticipated things, because they kind of run with it as well. They'd be like, oh yes, an unanticipated thing, like the other day that happened to me. This, people start telling their own stories. So that was really great. Then I started to give them clues about specifically what this thing was for me. The first clue was that I think it can be expensive. So then they're like, ooh, an unanticipated bill, an unanticipated fine, an unanticipated cost. Yeah. And then I told them, I actually can't remember what my clues were, but the clue, the final clue, which is when they get it, is it involves searching, meeting, packing, and unpacking. And
Okay, so it's a one-night stand. Okay.
Who's packing? Who's packing? Expensive, yeah. Yeah. So it's an unanticipated house move. I'm being a little bit creative with the use of house move there, but we can say that, can't we? An unanticipated house move happened to me 3 times in the last 2 years. So then, there's a quick bit of, have you ever had an unanticipated house move? And actually some of the students...
I have a quick question before you move on to that part. Would you consider this like the section where you're kind of feeding them little nuggets of like, oh, it's expensive, it's, there's packing, unpacking, these little nuggets. Would you consider that to be kind of like discovery, or like more like context clues or something like that?
To be honest, I think the primary function is just intrigue and engagement.
It's just intrigue.
To be perfectly honest, I think it's just
kind of just to add more crumbs to lead them deeper.
It's kind of fun. Yeah, it's just kind of fun to get a few clues and try and guess something, isn't it? It's like a game. So again, that's the primary thing. You could argue that there's other things going on there, like, it's providing some contextual language and blah 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 blah, but I think the main thing is that it's just a bit of fun. It's the same as
I just bring it up because it reminds me of stuff, when I've been teaching like IELTS, and you're pushing them so much to think rather not about the word but the context around the word to understand it. It kind of reminds me of like that process, but obviously with a little bit more pizzazz.
Yeah, well, it's not entirely intentional if that is what's happening. Okay. But I think partly you could argue that that's part of the rationale of dialogic storytelling overall, couldn't you? You could argue that it provides these wider contexts rather than focusing on here's a bunch of words related to holidays, whatever. So ask them if they've had unanticipated house moves, or if they know anyone who has. And as I previously mentioned, my students at the moment, my in-person students, are asylum seekers and refugees primarily. So most of them have had unanticipated house moves. We're talking to like Ukrainians here, you know what I mean? Right. So obviously they've got a fair bit to say about unanticipated house moves. Even in this country, though, there was a student who had a really interesting story. She said, one time, came back to their apartment one day, surrounded by police barriers up, and they found that there was a Albanian cannabis farm under the house, and it flooded, or someone had flooded it, and so then the police had got involved, and they had to move basically because the building was just destroyed from this flooded, and apparently it was a deliberate act from a rival gang, some sort of gang fighting going on. But yeah, they destroyed the building by flooding the cannabis farm.
UK, it's not like drive-bys, it's targeted flooding. A leaflet campaign.
Indeed. So and obviously that's a great story in and of itself, and that's we all know you get emergent language like that coming up, someone with this kind of emotional involvement in a story, you just run with it, don't you? Just okay, let's talk about that for 25 minutes because it's interesting and everyone's engaged and it's memorable and loads of good language comes up from it. So we spent loads of time on that. Of course, it might not happen. They might not have anything to say. Has anyone ever had an unanticipated house move? No. Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. Maybe I got lucky with that. But anyway, went really well. Then finally we move on and start to talk about the 3 times this happened and why it happened. And each one of these is unique and involves a little bit of interesting vocabulary. So the first one I said the first one was in 2020, in February, and it involved an opportunistic landlady. And then we talk about opportunistic. Because obviously everyone knows opportunity, but only some students know that opportunistic is negative. Opportunistic means taking advantage of a situation, often at the expense of morals and ethics. So we have a lot of fun talking about opportunistic people. Do you know anyone who's opportunistic? Any celebrities, any friends or family members you consider to be opportunistic? Maybe you consider yourself to be...
That's a deep well.
Maybe you consider yourself to be opportunistic. So, have a good discussion about opportunistic. Get that firmly embedded in there. Nice bit of vocabulary. And then I move on, a few more clues about that, where it becomes sort of right. So if you remember, March 2020, we had lockdown number 1. And that was around about when this was. A bit later, actually. I'm getting my times wrong here. It doesn't matter. So it was during a lockdown, and we start talking about, well, what would an opportunistic landlady do during the pandemic? And they get all kinds of interesting, raise the rents and all this kind of stuff. And it's actually related to the fact that people were unable to go abroad on holiday. And so she wanted to let the room as a holiday letting. So you've also got that vocabulary, a holiday letting. So she was trying to make money from that, so she tried to kick me out. So that was the first unanticipated house move. And the second one, again, got some lovely vocabulary here. The second one is due to a dodgy flat. Dodgy. So we got the lovely dodgy there, and we talk a lot about dodgy. What's dodgy? What's a dodgy person? What's a dodgy chair? If you sit on a dodgy chair, what happens?
Yeah.
Have you ever bought anything that's dodgy? Do you know any people who are dodgy? So we've got kind of dodgy, kind of untrustworthy and low quality and doesn't do what it should do. So once we've established really what dodgy is, and people really love the word dodgy. Some of them know it, some of them don't know it, but when you start talking about it, they're like, oh yes, we like this. Dodgy. That's great. So dodgy, dodgy, dodgy. It's a very British kind of... Do the Americans say dodgy that much? Dodgy.
No, they don't. They don't say dodgy whatsoever. I'm trying to think of what the equivalent would be over here. Nothing comes to mind, just kind of like low. Yeah, you more kind of explain it.
Rough.
Whoever's listening or watching this, if a word comes to mind and you're across the pond, leave it in the comments below, and we can come back and explore that later.
All right. Okay, so yeah, dodgy this, dodgy that, and then of course we go on to a dodgy flat, and I show some pictures of dodgy flats. And then it's pair work, bit of brainstorming. What things can be dodgy about a flat? What is dodgy about a flat? And you've got loads of vocabulary there related to dodgy apartments, dodgy flats. And I quite liked this. I only discovered this when I did this class yesterday with a new group. I was actually substituting another teacher, so I'd never taught them before, and I decided, I'm going to do my unanticipated house move class because I've been enjoying that. And I did that, and I discovered something quite nice, which is 3 words that come up when talking about dodgy flats. They have noun and adjective forms that kind of fit well. They follow a neat little pattern, and I don't normally focus on form at all. So the fact that this kind of came up on the board, I was like, oh, look at that, that's nice. So it was a leak, leaky, leak, leaky, mold, moldy, and another one. Leak, leaky, a leaky, mold, moldy, and
moist.
Noisy. That's it.
Oh, noisy.
Yeah. So there was a lot of noise. It's a noisy flat, right? There were loads of leaks. They had leaky windows. There was loads of mold. There was moldy walls, right? So we got those lovely 3 pieces of vocabulary with the noun and adjective forms, and they're all E to make the adjective form. So that was wonderful, and obviously talk about all the other dodgy things about a flat. It can be cold, the heating's expensive, it's in a dodgy area, the landlord's dodgy, etc., etc. Yeah.
Opportunistic as well, right?
Yeah, less I mean, he is a bit,
dodgy.
but less so. More just doesn't care, I think, than opportunistic. But yeah, to some extent opportunistic. So yeah, the dodgy apartment, blah, 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 talk about that. Have you ever lived in a dodgy apartment? Have you ever had a leak? Yes, everyone's had leaks. Everyone's had this. Everyone, where I live now, everyone seems to have mouldy walls as well. So there's plenty for people to talk about with all this vocabulary. Have a good whinge about their own apartments. In this particular instance, the class I just did, this was actually really handy because the teacher who I was subbing for wanted me to prepare them to write a letter complaining to their landlord. So this was perfect because it just led straight into that. It was like, right, okay, now you're going to write a letter complain about all these things, or any ideas you want to your landlord. So it worked really well. Just complete coincidence, really. Anyway. So that's.
They would just be like, "This guy's brilliant. He's a savant."
Yeah.
So what was the last one then?
Yeah. So we got on to number 3, which is probably the least interesting one, actually. It's not like I come up with it on the spot. I didn't put a great deal of thought into it, but it still ends up being an interesting class nonetheless. So the last one. What's the vocabulary that I used for the last one? It was... that's right. I said the last one was kind of my fault. The last one's kind of my fault because I made an assumption. That was it. I made an assumption. I can't remember if there's another word there, a something assumption. But anyway, assumption. So we talk about assumption and assume. It's surprising how few students seem to know the word assume. Because you think it's quite kind of simple vocabulary, but actually a lot of them don't know it. And we've got this lovely thing as well with assume when they don't know it, that I give them the little story about how I used to work with a lady in Sheffield who always used to say, "Don't assume, it makes an ass out of you and me." Yeah.
I was wondering when you were going to say that.
It's classic office.
It's a great way to remember it as well.
Yeah.
Like almost like a mnemonic.
It is a mnemonic, and it's good. So anyway, that comes up. Assume, assumption. I made an assumption. What's an assumption? An assumption's when you predict something, but you don't check, especially when perhaps you should. That's when we use this assumption, isn't it? It's like you're predicting something, but you're not checking it. You don't have kind of something to check it against, or you just don't check it for one reason or another, which is what I did. So yeah, the third, and then I talk about that a little bit. So, how could I be caught out by an assumption? What would that mean? How would it be an unanticipated house move because I made an assumption? And people normally get somewhere about there that I assumed that that my contract would continue at the end of the contract, and the landlady decided that it wouldn't, which she could have told me, but she didn't. But on the other hand, depends how you see it, doesn't it? If you see it like a business deal, then she's completely in the right. If you see it like a social deal, then it's a little bit not nice, perhaps, to not actually be clear and upfront with your tenant. But that's what happened anyway. So it's this assumption. So they're the 3 unanticipated house moves that I've had, and obviously that then you've got a lot of vocabulary there to work with, to expand on and to talk about.
It almost feels like it's too much. It feels like any one of those 3, maybe less so the latter, you could just do a whole class around.
No, I don't know. I think you might be right, but it's not like the board is like plastered with vocabulary at this point. It's like there's probably about sort of 6 or 7 interesting phrases that have come up, And bear in mind that originally I did it with this is the upper intermediate version, so they did know some of these words anyway. It wasn't all new stuff.
Okay.
So then what we go on to is problem solutions, because this leads into I got some problems. Okay? Got some problems. Number one, all the apartments in my price range are rubbish. What should I do? Right? So we got this, what should I do? And I did a little injection of language on asking for advice and giving advice. So, what should I do? Can you help me? What do you advise? And then the responses, I think you should. Maybe you could, all that kind of stuff. So it goes on to that. And this is still kind of working as a class where pairs are coming up with solutions. So, the apartments are all rubbish in my price range. What should I do about that? Have a think, talk together, 2 minutes, right? What's everyone's ideas? Oh, you should get a new job. You should find a cheaper apartment. You should move to another city, etc., etc. And there's a range of these. There's about 4 or 5 problems that I have. I've got 2 cats. No one wants to rent to someone with cats. What should I do about that? One of the beautiful things about this is all these things are real. Actually, they're real problems that I had. I've got too much stuff, don't have enough stuff to put it in, so how am I going to organize it? I don't have a car, how am I going to move the stuff? What should I do about that? So it's great authentic problem solution, and it's a way of kind of drilling in that vocabulary of what should I do about that? I think you should, maybe you could, etc., etc. And then once we're done with all that, that's sort of the end of my input, my language input, if you're thinking from a traditional PPP style, which obviously it isn't, because the whole time we've been communicating anyway.
Yeah.
It's not teacher talk time, it's discussion with everyone time. Then
maybe it's more, you could, if you were to do it ESA, it would fit better because it does fit kind of under that broad engaged banner.
It is engaged, yeah. And then finally, so at this point we now go on to what you might call a freer practice, but it's all been freer practice anyway, because none of these activities really have been heavily exercise focused or heavily that's right, that's wrong focused, apart from perhaps if it's sometimes a bit of pronunciation work in between, or doing a bit of work with the given advice phrases, but mostly it's just freer discussion all the way. But then we get to the kind of the more student orientated version. It's not even that though, because the whole class is I would argue is student orientated, because you diverge when one of the students comes up with something emergent and interesting. But then or
that you're kind of giving more of the agency to them or something like that, rather than it feels like it's going through you.
Yeah, I think really all I'm trying to say is it's the bit where I completely step back and my story is no longer involved. Is the last bit, which is give them a list of topics, and I'm sure loads of teachers have done this. It's this classic way of doing problem solutions. Give them a load of topics, tell them to invent 4 or 5 problems based on those topics. Topics are things like health, money, animals, people, relationships, right? You just invent problems. Oh, I've got a dodgy knee. Right? You can use the language from the class. Got a leaky bath, whatever. And what should I do about that? So once you've got 4 or 5 topics, well, it's obvious then, isn't it? Everyone stands up, put them in lines. This side, take turns, ask and answer about your problems, offer advice, use the target language. What do you think I should do? Oh, I think you should. Bum. And you rotate the people so everyone gets a chance of talking to everyone, and that can go on for 30 minutes if you want. So that's it.
Classic.
Follow it up with a bit of error correction, perhaps. Yeah, it's really good, and isn't it interesting? Really, I mean, it's true. I'm drawing on a lot of things here, So it's to say that it was 5 minutes to come up with this class. That's not entirely true, because I'm drawing on previous things that I've done. For example, the stage of the class, which introduces problem solutions and is where I'm talking about the problems that I have moving, what can I do about that? I've done that before. The first time I had to move, I made a class on problems and solutions, and that's where that came from. So that part of the class, even though I didn't have my 2 cats then, so obviously it's been adapted since then with new problems, but that activity was an older class that I had. You know, so there's kind of this idea that, yes, it is kind of something that has just been spontaneously produced from a story in the moment, and I kind of improvised with it and built it up as I went. But also, this is where experience comes in, doesn't it? Where you have so much you can draw upon. So you're like, oh yeah, that class that I designed 3 years ago, that part of it would fit really well here to make this a more sort of complete class.
Yeah, I think kind of what we're dancing around here is the teacher being experienced enough to have a selection, a tool set of frameworks that they can draw upon, and also having a well of authentic materials and then combining them. And it's interesting because it's not the approach that you generally get in, you know, English language teaching in general. It's always kind of like, think of the material first, come up with a curriculum, put it together in a book. We need something about health, we need something about the future, we need something about the past, blah, 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 blah. And then you try to find that material. But it seems to be that what Dogme and you're touching on is that, you know, you naturally want to talk about these things. These invigorate you, and it actually is relevant to the students because it's, you know, a big topic, and then all you have to do is kind of put it into the structure. I came up with a really interesting thought. I've really oversold it right now. But have you seen the TV show Fleabag?
No.
It's fantastic. I absolutely love the show. It started out as a one-woman performance at the Fringe Festival, which we both know very well. And so the woman that did that also wrote the show, Phoebe Waller-Bridges. Fantastic. I was watching an interview with her, and her writing process is very similar to what you described. So what she does is she has all these experiences in life, and she just kind of puts down all these kind of like quirky, things that happen to her, because she's a bit, she's a flea bag, she's putting herself out there. She's had a lot of experiences and funny situations, and then she kind of puts all of these kind of like on a board on a wall, and then she's like, this kind of links to this, and then this kind of, well, if I link these two together, then this kind of goes there, and it kind of evolves in the script to kind of like an episode or a story. Yeah. And I was like, when you were describing it, that came to mind. I was like, it's a very similar process, and I've heard of this process before. I think Bowie did something similar, when he did Life on Mars. He had just kind of like these lines that are really beautiful lines, and then he's like, well, if I put this line together with this line, he had the strips of paper, and that's how he would write some songs. It's very like that, and I'd be interested for people out there listening and watching, is there a term for this process? Because it seems to be out there quite a lot in many different forms across many different genres, TV, teaching, music. I like the idea of emergent, but I'm not sure that quite captures it, because it's something there. It feels more like you're tapping into something, and then when you tap into it, you're just kind of like catching it in a form, almost like you're tapping into a maple tree and then deciding what container is it going to go in. Is it going to go in a cup, a bottle, your mouth, whatever? bathtub.
Yeah, I think it's partly just the skill of being a teacher and a storyteller, which I've never really thought of myself as a storyteller, and certainly not a good storyteller. But I guess the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I remember when I was doing my dip and I had that tutorial, the online tutorial with Jamie, you know, and he kind of come on and he said, you know, we're teachers, but also we're storytellers. And I thought, God, I've never really thought of myself as a storyteller. I've always thought of myself as really bad at telling stories, actually. But I think, yeah, the more that you play with it, the more that you spot useful ways of linking a story up and also of applying it to teaching. And I think there is a specific skill to that as well. It's not just about storytelling, but there's a way of integrating stories with teaching, which the more you try it, the better you get at it. And again, I don't think I'm good at it, but I think not many people are, because I don't think people really experiment with it a lot.
What would you say is the key to that? Because when we've watched those dialogic storytelling lessons, and we spoke with Jamie, there's a definite format to it, but it's hard to put your finger on, apart from it's got a hook and it's laced with intrigue. But how you would kind of like try and hammer that down, I'm not sure. I can't verbalize it quite well enough.
I don't think it has necessarily that much of a structure. It's kind of like music in a way, isn't it? You know, it's like there's not a mathematical formula that necessarily applies to music, but there's some structure. You can't just play random notes. So
yeah, I mean, how does AI do it? AI now, we can now use machine learning to generate music to sound, but that it kind of becomes kind of like that manufactured pop, right? So we know, oh, this sounds like a Drake song, so machine learning can copy and say do a song that sounds like Drake, but it doesn't have that same substance. Not like Drake has much substance, but yeah, I don't care. I don't care if you're a Drake fan out there. You know, screw you. Right.
I think that is a good example, though. I think that's basically it. I think there is something to that. You know, basically, I think what we're saying is, I don't think you can really. Well, you could try actually. But I'm not sure how much utility there would be in creating a sort of step-by-step how to make a dialogic class outline. You could do it, but in to some extent, I see that as a little bit antithetical to where we should be going. I want to be a little bit careful there, because, you know, I don't think that teachers should suddenly become improvisational jazz artists, but because that would be gay.
Yeah, but when you do that class and you're talking, it sounds like Jamie talking in a way.
I know what you mean. So, I know what you mean, but that might just be because I sort of, you know, when you admire the way that someone does something, you begin to embody it a little bit. So it might be that.
But I can slowly see that as you evolve with doing this, I can slowly see a richness to it.
There's definitely there's definitely a rich twist, but that's, again, I think that's just teaching, isn't it? That's what happens. If someone teaches something, they inject it with a part of themselves as well, but also they're influenced by, you know, wherever they got this original thing from. So yeah, that's kind of the beauty of it. But the thing is, Neil, you know, to get back to it, because your original question was something like, what was it, like, how do we develop that, or what should teachers be doing to kind of develop this, or something like that, right?
It was around that. It's like, how do we get that lightning and put it in a bottle so other teachers can do it? I mean, you learn it by kind of like copying and emulating, and it clicked for you, but it doesn't always click. Some people like need that IKEA manual.
Well, this is the thing though. I mean, I've been using Jamie Keddy's lesson plans since 2014. So almost 10 years, 9 years of using Jamie Keddy lesson plans. But I didn't start really playing around with my own dialogic stuff. I mean, I've kind of done a little here and there. So it's very recently that I've got like really into it, like, and actually started doing my own stuff, completely my own stuff, you know, rather than just adapted somebody else's stuff. So that's been 9 years. So I think what I would say, and I think what I would even say to myself in the past as well, is you just got to experiment more. Because, you know, I remember what happened, actually, is that when I first discovered Jamie's stuff, I just absolutely loved it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to do this. And I tried a few of my own, and they kind of bombed. You know, and I was like, oh, and then that kind of put me off. It's like, oh, I'm not going to try again for years or whatever. But, you know, occasionally, eventually you get to another one and it clicks. Like, I'm talking about this unanticipated house move one. For one reason or another, it went down amazingly. And since then, you know, I love teaching it because I'm so confident it's going to be at least quite good, because it went down so well in that first time. And I think, you know, there's a bit of a X factor there with that. You know, you don't know what mood are the students in, how much you're going to get from them, you know.
Or what was the difference between this and that? Because it sounds like for me the difference was, you know, maybe the others were more contrived, whereas this is very natural and tied to something real, with deep emotions to it that also connect to them as well.
That's true. That's true, that the ones that I tried that bombed in the past were more heavily prepped. Mm-hmm. But I thought they were inspired when I was planning them. To be honest, I'm hesitant to say that there's a good reason for that. Beyond, okay, another 9 years of experience helps. Mm-hmm. But I also think there's a bit of luck involved. You know, I think you just got to try. You know, you did stand-up comedy. You just got to try stuff. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And you kind of find things. So it's about experimenting, you know, rather than trying to necessarily discover the secret formula that will allow you to always produce amazing dialogic story classes. You know, I'm sure that'd be great marketing. Rich Nolan's Dialogic Storytelling Training Course. Well, you will discover the formula.
I actually think that we kind of have wandered into an area of a masterful teacher, in that, you know, what you're saying is you kind of did this for 9 years, just kind of copying what another teacher was doing, and then you had like kind of like this muscle memory of what it is, and you just kind of put your own spin onto it. What that sounds to me like is wax on, wax off. It's Miyagi-Do.
It's true. Yeah, and I think there is a bit of that, but I think I definitely would encourage more experimentation. And it's tough as a teacher.
What about reflection? That seems to be a key component.
Reflection is mega important. I don't do enough of that myself. That's one of the things that you get out of good teacher training courses, is having to sit down with someone afterwards and kind of justify the things you did and say what you think went well and what not, because it is really useful, reflection. Yeah, I totally think reflection is mega important, but experimentation first as well. And I think people are afraid to experiment for good reason, because teaching is such a social thing. You can easily feel like a twat when you experiment. Because you know, can you imagine if I'd showed up to this class, 5 minutes of prep, and then everything went to shit, and just be like, oh yeah, obviously, because you spent 5 minutes prepping it, you know. But it's not that simple.
They only see the tip of the iceberg. They don't see the everything that's underneath the waterline that you can kind of bring to it.
Yeah. And you know, it goes a little bit to that. I think any kind of experimentation as a teacher is great, and I think you do need to do it. And you could argue, oh, but you know, they're paying for these classes, and if you're using it as an experiment, no. because this can have massive benefits to you as a teacher and to all your future students by you going outside the box a little bit and trying something different. It's so beneficial. So it should always
define it a bit different.
It should always be encouraged.
That we're experimenting, but it's not like where it's not a laissez-faire experimentation. This is not a new teacher. This is a teacher that can teach, that's got many years experience, could break can do a lesson well. It's just what they're doing is they're kind of trying to, I don't know, evolve, break out their chrysalis to kind of expand. Yeah,
I agree, but I'm not sure if we should necessarily limit experimentation to experienced teachers.
Well, how would a new teacher, that's like, I'm talking like fresh out of the boat, they've done a CELTA and they're in a school. How should they be doing these kind of Dogme Dialogic Storytelling Classes off the bat?
Yeah,
or?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I think you're right. The experience helps, and the more things you see, the more you know things you can do, and blah 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 blah. But I think it would certainly not be harmful for that teacher to also say, right, on Friday, I'm going to leave 30 minutes of all my classes unplanned and just come up with something during the class. Mm-hmm. And some of those are going to be shit. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be panicking and go, oh, fuck, that took 5 minutes and I expected it to take 30, and the students are looking at me like I'm a dickhead and what am I going to do? Yeah, you have to go through that, because then you start to realize what works, what doesn't, why it doesn't, how to pad things out, how to cut things down. All of these skills are things that you learn as a teacher, and I do think you can learn them faster by experimenting earlier. I think if you're too structured, then and you're afraid to go off piste, and you're always coming into classes with 20 extra worksheets, because that's the easy way of worrying about running out of time. You just have a load of shit to throw at the students.
You just got filler, right? Yeah.
Yeah, just have a load of crap.
Everyone
right.
knows that.
Now you're going to do 10 minutes of grammar exercises, and if you finish them, then you're going to do another. But to be able to do something else, a bit out of the box, oh, we've got 10 minutes left. Right, okay. Draw a picture of your favourite room in your house, but it's a secret, and then describe it to the person next to you. These kind of things, right? Which are really cool, fun little activities that you could do on a million different topics and in many different ways. But yeah, you only discover these things, and you only discover the utility of them by being put in these situations. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would encourage more experimentation, a lot more. It's really frustrating to have these kind of conversations where we're talking about stuff which I think is quite exciting and is really great teaching, and I think it sticks with the students, and they love it. They love these kind of classes when they go well. Mm-hmm. And then I'm looking around me, right, and the vast majority of teaching that I'm seeing going on, and that is institutionally encouraged, it's almost chalk and talk. And if it's not chalk and talk, it's chalk and talk and a bit of, now talk with your partner about the chalk and talk. Hey, I'm doing communicative language teaching because I'm letting them talk to their partner.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just one of those things where I just find it very difficult on how we communicate, because it's weird, because we are teachers, so it's like, well, how do we teach how to teach in this way? And this idea of, well, just kind of go out there and experiment. It doesn't really fit well in the training manual.
I understand. You can make it more structured. You can make it. The issue is,
it almost feels like what it feels like. It feels less like this is how a lesson format should look, and it feels more like it should be a tiered firstly, how's your English? Well, how's your subject knowledge? Just to go more broader, do you have solid subject knowledge? Okay, then that's one part of the checklist for you to be able to go experiment. I wouldn't say to someone that's to go experiment that's struggling with a teacher that's struggling with the subject knowledge of what they're teaching, otherwise, because it's kind of like you're spinning plates. It's adding more onto the plate. It's like trying to drive the car but not actually know how to move the gear stick or anything like that, and I think that's an example of something that would be on that checklist. I feel like we would give a checklist of prerequisites, and then when you hit all these prerequisites that are kind of a little bit arbitrary, you go, okay, now you experiment. You know what I mean? This is all just coming to me right now, so I've not got great examples, but...
Well, first of all, when you say subject knowledge, do you mean knowledge of teaching or knowledge of English language?
Well, I think that would be another requisite as well. So a kind of an understanding of pedagogy and application of pedagogy, and also subject knowledge in whatever subject you're teaching. So if you're teaching English, to have a good foundational knowledge of, this is an adjective and they go with, nouns rather than verbs, and, or if you're doing math, to actually know math,
Yeah. I think that you're right, but because I have some sort of mental illness that I have to completely be contrarian to whatever the
I think people are used to it.
The dogma is. It's not contrarian to you. It's contrarian to whatever the current dogma is, and the current dogma is that people massively overrate subject knowledge in all areas, in all subjects, especially in language teaching, but in all areas they overrate it, because they overrate it compared to pedagogy and ability to teach. And because of that, I almost, my attitude to subject knowledge is almost whatever. You don't need subject knowledge. Now, that's obviously ridiculous. And as I said, I've got some sort of mental illness related to just being totally contrarian. But yeah, for me...
physics, I don't need to know anything about it to teach it. Just,
You can learn it as you go.
Some subjects are kind of like that. That's one of the problems with teaching English, and maybe less so like music, but maybe stuff like more like the humanities, art, and drama, and all that sort of stuff.
I'm kind of serious though. I think, wouldn't it be interesting, right? This would be an interesting experiment. I'd be willing to put myself forward for this. Okay, get some expert of quantum physics, right? And we're not going to make it too unfair. It's going to be teaching a module, Introduction to Quantum Physics 101. So a first year university module. All right.
Yeah.
2 classes, right? Split class. Some of the students with me, some of the students with the expert quantum physicist. All right? Mm-hmm. I know a bit about quantum physics, but I don't know a lot. I certainly don't know university level quantum physics. And then who can teach them better in terms of that knowledge? Now, obviously, we'd have some...
So this is students that don't have any kind of... or background. They're not. It's not.
Well, they would have A-level physics, because they'd be doing a first year course in physics. So they'd had A-level physics, and then they'd be coming to do a module in quantum physics at university, which I have no idea what that entails.
Yeah.
It's got to be some pretty wacky stuff. But then this would be the test, wouldn't it? Because it would be, and this is where it'd be something as experiment, which is very difficult to set up, because how do you find an expert quantum physics lecturer, professor who's willing to admit that they're shit at pedagogy, because that's what you're supposed to be doing, isn't it? You find the person who's got loads of pedagogy but doesn't know anything about quantum physics, and the person who doesn't give a shit about pedagogy but is an expert, and then who can get those students to have a greater knowledge of the information in that syllabus, in that term. And you know, whether I'm being misled by my own biases here, I am 100% certain that the teacher who's good at teaching will be way more effective. That's my inclination, but it's a wild guess, and I can't be certain. I could be totally wrong. It could be that quantum physics is so difficult. You wouldn't get a teacher, would you? You would just get a quantum physicist. You could do, and I'd be even more. They do have to have done some presentations and stuff like that, so they would probably be comfortable. I mean, I'd be even more confident in that situation about what was going to happen. But I think even if you put up against university professors, a lot of them are really shit. they rely on students just working really hard and studying really hard. That's what they rely on. They rely on the students studying really hard, which, for the most part, is probably going to work, because if someone goes to university to do physics, and this is where I might come unstuck, because maybe students that go to university to study physics, maybe they don't need pedagogy, because they're already going to hit the books. They don't need you to make it interesting for them, because they are study machines. Maybe that's what it is. But maybe if you can just get to that extra sort of 2, 3, 4%, and then you suddenly start getting better results because you know how to teach, even though you don't have a deep understanding of the subject. You know, I think having a deep understanding of the subject it's definitely a good thing. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's a good thing. But you know, we must admit that we place excessive emphasis on it. Like, you know, I mean, the crap that I know about languages, you know, that's just way beyond what anyone learning a language needs to use. And whenever it comes out in the class, it kind of just...
You've got all this knowledge, and I can just imagine you got all this knowledge, and then you get a job at the Happy Giraffe in, you know, like in Vietnam or something like that, and you're like, kick the ball, throw the ball.
It's like, you know, whenever it comes out, it just seems like I'm showing off, you know. I start talking to the students about, you know, antecedent references and morphemes and, you know, stuff like that, and vowel shifts in pronunciation. It just seems, you know, too much, really. They don't need to know it. You can kind of see when you say stuff like that, the students are like, oh yeah, this guy knows his stuff, you know. And you're like, yeah, that's right, I do know my stuff, you know. And that's basically all you really get out of it, you know. I mean, yeah, sure, it's wonderful as a language learner to understand things like vowel shifts, because it gives you more confidence in the fact that languages are kind of a fluid, evolving thing, and when someone says what's the right way to pronounce this word, that doesn't really exist. And maybe it's a useful way of explaining that. But you don't. It's not really necessary. You know, you could just say there's many different ways of pronouncing something, and you know, end of. You know, and maybe demo it by showing this word and this word. That's it. You don't have to talk about vowel shifts. You don't have to understand it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to bleat on too much about this, because I think it's potentially painting a target on my back to start going around saying I don't think teachers...
I'm sure that there's already a Channel 4 show in the works, like Wife Swap, Class Swap, ProfesorRich's Classroom Nightmares, kind of Ramsey style.
I'm totally prepared to do that. But
Hell's Classroom.
But I don't want to...
What are you? You're an idiot sandwich.
I don't want to be known as the guy who's like, teachers don't need to know anything. Just be a good teacher. It starts to become like Confucius almost, doesn't it? A teacher is a teacher. Oh.
It feels that way, but it kind of feels like what you've been talking about is almost kind of transcending the classroom. And this is funny. I'm not sure if you're aware of this yet, but Jamie, I saw recently, is actually going to do a show at the Fringe Festival. He's doing a stand-up performance. It's something about hamsters, I think. I saw images of hamsters.
All right.
But, I was like, that makes complete sense, because what he's doing is very akin to a stand-up show. You're kind of talking about these these experiences that you've had, and kind of tying them together and making it in a like a funny way. And everything that you describe is very what you do when you go through the process of doing like a stand-up set. You're kind of putting it together, you're testing it in front of audiences, it changes, it moves. It is this storytelling skill that eludes many people, that I so desperately want to try and define and bottle and sell, because we'd make so much money. But it seems to be concurrent with all these geniuses that are out there, be it in film, music, or in the classroom. They have this art down to pat, and it seems to come from kind of like having a framework, a kind of a structure in their own mind that maybe is a universal structure. I'm not sure, that they take their well of experience and life and their stories that might not even be that interesting, but because they kind of tie them all together and put them in this container structure, it just makes magic, basically. So I'd say the way I could describe it.
That's right. It is more about the storytelling and the techniques than the actual material. Although the material is obviously critical.
The material, you can't just discard that, because it has to be material that fits to you. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it goes back to that thing of if you feel. That's why
like if you taught the structure and someone else did your lesson, it might not land as well.
No, true. Yeah, and there's some of Jamie's stuff which doesn't land for me. And weirdly enough, other people say it's really good, because I remember he's got one called Mr. W, and it's about the mischievous character Mr. W. Like blowing up, like lifting girls' skirts and all this kind of stuff. And it turns out Mr. W's the wind. It's like stealing people's umbrellas and lifting up girls' skirts. You're like, who is this guy? And then it's like, oh, it's the wind. So it's kind of a cheeky little story. It's never really landed for me, that one. I've never really gone on with it. But I know someone else, an English teacher, they think it's the best thing in the world. It's like their favourite class ever to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do. I think it's part of. Yeah, you're right. It's a personal thing, isn't it? And it's like it's that's where your personality as a teacher comes in. That if it doesn't click with you, it's not going to click with the students at that end of discussion. Teaching something that you don't feel passionate about. Going back to the quantum physics thing, that's where that could become a little bit challenging. It's finding a way that I can be passionate about teaching quantum physics when my memory of physics is that quantum physics is probably the dullest part of physics. It's really dull.
I would completely disagree with that, because I've been learning about it recently.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I would disagree.
Well, it might have been the level that I was studying at, because I just remember tables of subatomic particles with spin and the atomic weight and the names of all the particles, because there's 12 of them.
Have you heard of quantum? Go quick divergent. Have you heard of quantum entanglement yet?
Yeah. Now that sounds fascinating. See, you're talking about
that.
You're talking about theoretical quantum physics, which obviously is really. I'm sure that's more interesting. Whereas
but that's what I'm saying. You'd start with what you'd find interesting. Right?
Yeah, of course. No, you're absolutely right. I think we should start wrapping up.
Yeah. So, people out there listening, watching, what do you think? Are you going to experiment a little bit with this Dogme approach, this dialogic Dogme dance that
Yes,
Rich
you
has
are.
been doing? Yes, I can
Do
see
it.
him nodding, just pressuring. He's going to come around to your house. If you leave a comment, he'll be parachuting into the
Dogme.
classroom. Just leave your thoughts. Let us know what you think, what your experiences are. Is it something that you just completely disagree with? I'd love to hear the opposite side of this, of getting someone on the show that goes, no, it has to be by the book, and really support that, because we're always open to listening. So if you want to come on the show, head over to the website. You can contact us through the website, eltunderthecovers.com, or you can contact us at Gmail at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com. But most importantly, remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'm going to leave it with Rich to wrap it up in a Dogme style, because I'm putting him on the spot with some words that are really going to motivate you to do it.
Yeah. Always experimentation as a teacher. Experimentation as a teacher is the best way of finding your teaching mojo. And when you find your teaching mojo, that's when you really click as a teacher. Not only you feel that you're expressing yourself well, but also you feel fulfilled as a teacher because you're really doing what you want to do. There you go.
Wonderful.
Like, share, subscribe.
Bye-bye.
If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/ProfesorRich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click
Exactly.
off. Thank you.
Bye.